So what we want to do today is show you some of these lesser known features and tips that will help you unlock a whole new level of productivity. So to kick things off, let's go ahead and jump into the designer. Let me go ahead and drag this over and bring the designer on screen here. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, if you are familiar with Ignition, you know that we use an example of a motor UDT, a motor template, and those types of things a lot inside of our projects for demos, for webinars, etc. Right? In this example here that I have, we've basically taken a starter project, the base project, and added a few views here. The motor template that I just mentioned, some UDTs for our motors, etc. And we want to expand on that in this webinar here. So we're going to use this project as our base and talk about some of the things that are maybe just a little bit less known than some of those typical examples we show at a decent amount of times. So let's go ahead and jump in here. The first thing that I want to show is inside of this motors view. This motor view is pretty basic. You can see over here on the tree structure, I have a drop-down component and I have embedded view that's looking at my motor template, which is defined right here. Now, this motor template has one basic parameter, and based off of this parameter, I'm looking at a different motor, right? I'm just passing in a tag path there. This parameter is bound to my dropdown. You can see I'm looking at directly to that dropdown to look at its props and the value that we're selecting. So anytime that we select a new motor, you'll notice I'm looking at a different motor, right? So the end user can look at any motor that they choose as long as the option is there in the dropdown. So really basic example, right, of how to use components together on a screen. But say you created this view and now I went into a project review, and within that project review, maybe the end user says, hey, I want to add a text field here in front of my dropdown, right? Maybe give a little bit more context as to what this dropdown is for, maybe say something like select motor. So let's go ahead and add that in there. And actually this kicks off my first tip of the day here, is wrapping components inside of a container. If you right click on this dropdown, come down to wrap in container, you can actually wrap these components within a container, and you'll notice that here's my motors view. Our structure of the view has changed. Now I have a flex container inside of that as dropdown. So that's a handy way where you can do a couple steps at once instead of dragging a flex container on, moving that drop down inside of the flex container, etc. You can just do that automatically all within one step there. Let's go ahead and add that label on that we were talking about earlier. Drag this on, move this to the front. Let's go ahead and change this to select motor. Looks pretty good. Let's make this a little bit wider here, 100 pixels wide. And now we have, our updated screen. Let's go ahead and throw this into preview mode. Second tip of the day, instead of clicking on the the play icon, you can actually hit F5. And this is going to toggle you in and out of preview mode within the designer. The preview mode, of course, allows you to interact with these views as if you were in the client, but F5 is an easy way to get into that. So now that we have wrapped our drop down in the flex container here, this no longer works. Now, the reason why that is because if we go back to this embedded view and we go back to our instance, you'll notice this is a direct binding to the component and it's dependent on the structure of my view over here, right? And so really best practice here is to create our bindings so they are not dependent on the structure of our view, because within perspective, they do change an often amount of times. So let's go ahead and show you how you can use best practice here within the view to get around the changing structure of the view, but keep the data flow and everything operating as you expect. So let's go ahead and go to the motors view. We'll add a custom property here. We'll call this instance because that's the name of my property or my parameter that I'm passing in. And we're going to go ahead and make this, I'm going to right click. Let's go ahead and copy path here and add the value over there. And now what we want to do is bind, instead of to the dropdown, we want to bind to that custom property that I just created, instance. So now you can see this path is very different. It's going to the view custom instance property. And so this path is never going to change because it's going from the top down instead of directly to that component. So we'll go ahead and hit OK there. And the other thing that we need to do, of course, is now link my dropdown to that as well. So anytime the value changes in my dropdown, the user selects that, right? That needs to update this custom instance property as well here. We also want to make this bi-directional so that if anything else updates this, the dropdown gets updated as well. So we can read and write to that custom property. We'll go ahead and hit OK there. That looks pretty good. And now I'll go ahead and toggle us back into preview mode again with our shortcut. And we should be able to still control our motor, sure enough. But now remember, we're going through the custom property instead of directly to the drop-down component. Now, if I take this drop-down out of this and change up the structure of the view, oh, that's really tall. Let's make this a little bit shorter there. Make it maybe 50 pixels tall. Now you'll notice that my view structure is definitely different, right? There's all the drop down is now outside of my Flex container here, but our functionality should still work, right? Because we're using that custom property, the page's custom property, instead of going directly to that binding. The other place where you might use this and take advantage of this is in a script, right? So just a really quick example of a button script and how you could use this as well, of course, is instead of going directly to that drop-down component, right? If we go to that drop-down component, you'll notice that this is kind of a fragile path, right? It's going directly to that drop-down, whereas we want, again, to use that views custom property, which doesn't ever change. And now we could do something like equals. I wonder if I still have the string in my clipboard. Nope. Let's go ahead and copy that again from the tag browser. We'll go ahead and copy path, go back into the script here, and I'll paste this so that now anytime that we click this button, it should update the custom property to motor1 and thereby updating my embedded view as well. So we'll go ahead and throw this into preview mode with our toggle, click this, and sure enough, there we go. So we can change it with the button, and we can change it with the drop down. So a really great way to design your perspective views to use best practices. And really one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is a lot of times folks are coming from a different SCADA platform, or they're coming from Vision, where you're just kind of dragging these components on the screen and binding them to each other. There's usually not a lot of nesting inside of containers or considerations of view or screen size, right? Those types of things, because you're building it for a specific HMI screen, which is a 1920 by 1080 or whatever that is. With perspective, of course, you can view this in a web browser, you can view this on a TV, you can view this on a laptop, right? And so that's where these containers come into play a little bit more, and doing or designing your screen like this really helps mitigate some of any rework that you might have to do when adjusting those screens and the content within them. So that's the first main point that I wanted to show off here, is just a little bit of a best practice on how to develop your screens. These other ones that I wanted to show are a little bit more little ways that you can add some flavor to your perspective views. So what I want to do is add a header at the top of this. Go ahead and drag this to the top, maybe make this 50 pixels tall. I'm going to go ahead and add a label in here, and I want to label this view as motor details so that the end user knows what they're looking at. The first thing that I wanted to mention here, first tip inside of this header, is the auto option for your basis. You'll notice that this is wrapped. I want this to be in a single line, right? And I may not even know how long this string is, right? This string may even be dynamic. And so what I want to do here is change, instead of manually making the the pixel width of this label something exact, I want to change it to auto, which automatically makes it the size of the content within this label. This can be done on a label. This can be done on a container. This can be done in pretty much every place where Basis is available, but it's going to automatically size this to the content within that component. So that's the first thing. The next thing I want to do is let's add an icon in here. And what I want to do with this icon is just add a little bit more context for the end user. I want it to, when I hover, show off something. And then when I right click on this, I want it to be able to bring up a menu that takes you to a motor's PDF, right? That maybe correlates the motor we're showing here, or a troubleshooting guide for this motor, right? So let's go ahead and change this icon to the info icon. That looks good. Let's go ahead and come down here to the meta properties section. You may not have browsed around this as much. It's maybe not as much of a used section of a component, but it has some really cool things down here. Let's go ahead and enable the tooltip section. And in this tooltip, I want the text to say, right click for more info. And so that way, when the user hovers over it, they know that they can right click that icon. When they right click that icon, I want it to bring up this context menu. Inside of this context menu, I want to give them a couple options. So I'll add an array element here. And this first one, I'm going to make a motor PDF. Right, what I was saying is we can browse to that motor PDF. We can add in an icon to this. I actually don't think we have any motor icons. The motorcycle helmet. Sure, let's use that one. And then we'll go ahead and select our type, right? Inside of this, you could have a sub menu to pop out another menu off of the main menu. We can specify a link, which is what we're going to do today. Call a method on this component, send a message across the screen, add a separator to visually separate categories of this menu. So let's add a couple links and then maybe separate those by a separator. So this first link, I'm going to have a URL that I just found, a PDF of a motor when I was Googling yesterday. So I'll go ahead and add this in here. And then you can target either this current page you're on or open a new tab. I want to open in a new tab, add another item. We'll make this a separator type. And then finally, we'll add a third item, and this one's going to be our troubleshooting PDF. We'll go ahead and keep that as link. I'll just use the same URL for intents and purposes this webinar, and then add this to, or specify this target as tab to open in a different tab. So that, I think, is all that I want to do here. Let's go ahead and save this. I'm going to show this off in a session, because that way you'll be able to see the tabs launching here. Bring this onto the screen. As you can see, our header is, we could probably add some flavor to it, add some spacing, some padding, some color, etc. But for purpose of the webinar, covering a lot of content, I'm going to leave those things out and just focus on the tooltip here. As you notice, it's saying right click for more info. So I'm going to right click. Here's my motor PDF with that motorcycle helmet. But we can click on this and open in a new tab. Here's that motor data sheet. And then we could also troubleshooting PDF. It's going to open on the same one there. But you can see you could have a lot of different options inside of this menu to do a whole host of different things. And of course, all of these items can be dynamic. So there you go. A couple different tips for adding some flavor for your end user, and some useful items, as well as best practices in developing some of your perspective screens. So with that, Adam, I'm going to throw it back to you. And I think we're staying in the designer, are we not?
Yes, we will. So here we are in my designer, like Reese mentioned, that's where we're going to stay for now. And we're also going to continue working with this same template view that he's been looking at and the same tags, right? So we'll start by taking a little bit more of a look into those tags. And as you can tell, these are UDT instances. Let's take a quick little look at those UDTs. We'll navigate over to our UDT definitions tab. And we have a motor UDT here that you'll see. Let's take a quick little right click and go down to this view UDT hierarchy. Now, what that's going to do is open up the UDT hierarchy tool. This was introduced in 8.1.2.3, And what it provides us here is a little pane on the left that shows the inheritance structure of this UDT and any other in that kind of flow of that inheritance hierarchy, as well as all of the members of each of these UDTs and which ones are inherited, which ones aren't, indicated by this little symbol over here, along with the parameters. It even gives us a nice little button here on the top left where we can show instances of each of these UDTs that we've created. And you even have some little buttons for sorting and filtering those instances as well. So this is a really nice tool for looking at your UDT inheritance structure and everything that's within them all in one nice consolidated window. And that's why we wanted to highlight it. Let's jump back over to the tags tab for a second here. And most of you are probably familiar with the ability to, take a tag out of the browser, drag it onto a screen, and select from this list of prospective objects and have the designer automatically create a binding to that tag value for you, right? Which is a cool, fun little option. What some of you might not be as familiar with is you can configure your template views to work in the same way with UDT structures UDT instances. And that's the next thing I'm going to go over is show you how to configure that. So if we go to our motor view here in the project browser, you'll see that in the props window for that, we have this drop config section. That's where we're going to set this up at. Under UDTs here is where we'll add the different UDT configurations that we want to use for the specific view that we're in. You'll see I have one set up here already, and each UDT that we set up is going to require these 3 parameters that you see. So the top one is called type. That is where we're going to select the UDT type that we want to drag instances of onto the screen. You'll see I've selected that motor type we were looking at. We also have a param property here. What this is doing is it's holding the name of the view parameter down here that we're going to pass that instance into. And then the third is the action property. Now you see action has 2 options in a dropdown that we can select here, path and bind. This one is set at path, and what it's doing here is it's passing the path of that UDT into that instance param. Then how you would use that within your template view is you would just bind to that tag path using an indirect binding with this path as the basis / whatever value you needed within that structure, whether it's AMPS or HOA. Now the other way to do it, the bind type, I've built in this motor v2 template here, and we'll see the slight difference there. You'll notice that all my other properties in the UDT configuration are the same, other than the action, which is set to bind. You'll also notice that the param itself is a completely different structure, right? Instead of one value holding that path, it's the actual full structure of that UDT instance. That's because the main difference here is that when you drag one on with the bind action set, it's actually creating a binding directly to this parameter on that instance. And how you would access these from within your properties on that view is with property bindings directly to the specific properties within this instance param. So let's take a quick look at how that kind of works on our motors list view here. You'll see I have a motor 1 drag on there already. Let's drag motor 2 up there. And now you can see I get my 2 options for my different views that I created. I'll use the regular motor 1 first, and you can see it just passed motor 2's path into the instance parameter. But if we do the same thing for motor 3 and use the V2, you'll notice that it does look a little bit different, right? It created this little binding right to the instance param, and we can see the whole structure there. So that's the difference between those two. One last thing we'll check out here while we're in an embedded view object is a nice little tip. If you're looking at one of these objects and you want to quickly get back to this view that this path is pointed at and not have to find it in your project browser, you can select this little cube right here that says open view, and it'll navigate you right back to the path that that's pointed at. So next thing I want to look at here in the designer is a couple really nice functions that we have in our system functions for troubleshooting with scripts. Now, we'll look at a couple different options, those being our system.util.loggers and our system.perspective.sprint. We'll start in the script console, which I'll drag onto this screen. And you'll see I have a little script here already. You're obviously going to be needing to troubleshoot things a little more detailed than this, right? So you might use this where you want to see maybe if your script entered an if statement or not, or see if a specific part of your script ran. Loggers are great for that, right? So you'll see what I'm doing is I've created a logger object using this system.util.getLogger. I've named it script console with this string right here. And when I create this logger object, it gives me access to these dot methods, these .info, .trace, and a few others that are all documented for the different logger types. And that's what that's doing. I'm making this an info type of logger and a trace level of logger. And this string in here is what the actual message that I'm logging is going to be. So let's run this. We'll do a quick execute. And you'll see that I logged my info test, but we didn't see the trace test. Now let's look at somewhere else we can see these loggers, and if we see it there, if we go to help and diagnostics, this is where we view the designer's logs. You can see that I also have my info test there, but still no trace. That's because of these logging levels. So if we scroll down and find our script console log, which should be added to this list now that we've created it, you'll see there's these levels beside it, and it's set at info by default. If we open up this dropdown, you'll see there's a whole bunch of other levels, and this is a top-down list. That means whatever level that you set it at, it will allow logs of that level and anything below to be sent using this logger. So trace being the top level, it was not allowing that log to send with it set at info. Let's make this trace and go back to our script console for a second and run it again. We'll see now that we updated our output console and we have at this time both the info and the trace. And we go do the same thing here in our diagnostics. And you'll notice that in the script console logger, we have an info and a trace, and they even have their own unique little icons to show that they're different levels of loggers. So that's loggers that you can use when you're working in the script console, but maybe you have scripts running on actual perspective objects. So let's look at how these things can be used there as well. I've got an event script running on this HOA button that we'll check out, right? It's just on action performed. So when you click it, what it's doing is it's looking at the control value property and finding a string based on what that value is to say what mode it is. And then I'm just logging that into a message that says motor was put in that mode. You see I've done something similar to what we saw in the script console, but this time I've named the logger demo logger. Now, I'm also doing something else down here, which is a perspective print. You'll see I'm sending it the same message though. The main difference between these two is that a logger is going to log at the level that the script is running at, which is why when we ran within the script console, the logger was sent to the output console in the designer and the designer's logs. That's because the script console runs scripts at the designer level, at the designer scope. Perspective print is always going to print at the client scope. So we'll see how these two kind of differ and how the logger works slightly different now that we're running on a perspective object, which runs its scripts at the gateway scope. So if we put this screen into test mode here, and we put our motor in off, we'll see that our output console updated and we have our perspective print down here saying our motor was put in off. However, we don't see our new log there. Where we can see that is in the gateway logs. You'll see I have my demo logger here saying that my motor was also put in off at that same time. That's because, again, this script was ran at the gateway scoped from that perspective object, which is where that logger logged at. Now, perspective print can also be useful for troubleshooting even within your actual web browser client sessions. So if I go to my tools and I launch a session there, It'll open up in a new screen for me, and I'll drag it in. You can see that it launched our project in my default browser, which is Chrome. One other cool little tool I'm going to show you while you're here is the developer tools within Chrome. These are like Chrome specific developer tools. So I go to these three little dots and I go to more tools and developer tools. It'll open up this little bar here, right? You'll see there's a lot of nice tools in here, but the first one we're going to look at is the console. The console is going to allow us to have see that output console for our client that we were seeing before. So if I go to my motors list and I put my motor in auto, you'll see my perspective print is now printing there. That's because, again, it's printing at the client level, and this web session, this client, is my client's console that's going to print it. One last quick little tool that we're going to look at while we're in here is this device toolbar. If I turn this on, it'll allow me to basically test the performance of my screen scaling, right? See how it scales as it goes to different sizes. There's even preset devices that you can test how it's going to perform on that specific device's screen.